Hello, my friends. Welcome to another emission of. I always wanted to say good morning, San Francisco. Good night. Which city is sleeping tonight? Radia.
I don't know.
Timbuktu, I guess. I was watching yesterday a movie from Africa. Well, good morning, everyone. We are on our 11 and 12 SDG goal, and we're going to talk about today sustainable cities and communities, but also we're going to talk about responsibility, consumption, and production. So Diego hasn't known yet which city is sleeping now, but good night to every single people is listening to us and is about to sleep. Well, I'm going to have today a wonderful conversation with a Radia Funna. She's a futurist, strategist, and she has this theory about ex-human, basically talks about the coevolution between machines and humans. And I'm going to say hi to Radia. Good morning, Radia. How are you, my sunshine?
Good morning, Mayra. How are you, my sunshine? Do you want me to take it, Mayra, and get started?
You tell me, Radia, because you know better. Which cities?
So yes, let me do that, my friend. So good morning, everybody. Good afternoon if you're here with me in New York, New Jersey, the East Coast of the United States. I am excited for today's show. We're actually doing 2 SDGs on one show. We were supposed to do SDG 11 yesterday, but there was an emergency and we did not actually get to SDG 11 yesterday. So today we are doing both SDG 11 and SDG 12. Let me start out with SDG 11 and talk a little bit about what SDG 11 is. You know, first of all, SDG 11 is, as you see on the wall, sustainable cities and communities. But what does that mean? What does it mean to put out an SDG for sustainable cities and communities? Let me take a few steps back and let's talk a little bit about what the SDGs are. And we've talked about that a few times on this show, but I always want to repeat it because I don't know how many of you have actually followed the many shows since we've had a show for every day of the SDGs, and it gets to be quite a bit. But we've had, so far, this is now our 11th SDG, right? So we've had about 8 or 7 shows to cover those, starting with poverty, SDG 1, going to zero hunger, SDG 2, going to health and good health and well-being, SDG 3, that's what I always forget. Quality education, SDG 4, gender equality, SDG 5, SDG 6 was clean water and sanitation, I need the board. SDG 7, affordable and clean energy, we had great guests for that. SDG 5, decent work and economic growth, another great guest in Lab 4. SDG 9, industry, innovation and infrastructure, which we at Build and Blaze took on because that's what we do here. And finally, SDG 10, reduced inequality, where Labor, who created the SDG ambassadors, our ambassador dolls that you've been seeing if you've been following us, also talked to us about reduced inequality from the point of view of fair wages. But again, I was supposed to be talking about SDGs, period, right? So SDGs are the Sustainable Development Goals. These goals are, in essence, the world's goals. They were adopted by 193 United Nations member states. So that's 193 countries in 2015. And the idea was at that time to give us 15 years to not perhaps fully solve all the world's greatest challenges, but at least give us an action framework to start working towards doing so. There were certain targets laid out with all these goals, certain targets that said, okay, these are the things that must be accomplished by that time. This is what we're aiming to do. And that time is 2030. 15 years from 2015, 2030. The premise of this show, the genesis of this show, is my theory of the exponential human, in short, X-human. And the theory, in essence, is talking about the co-evolution of human and machine. And my interest, after spending so many years in researching what became this theory, is realizing that we are reaching an evolutionary state where our evolution with machines is actually changing us. What used to be our utilization of machines became, I think, more of an evolution the smarter the machines got. So I call those machines the X machines, and I call us the X humans, so the exponential machines and the exponential humans. And as the human beings started to renegotiate their relationship with machines that had become smarter, more autonomous, more capable, etc., those machines started to change us on a more fundamental level. And that's, in essence, what the theory is about. That was the genesis of this show. And further to the SDGs, it occurred to me that we, as of 2020, will only have 10 years to meet the SDGs. And if we have 10 years as of 2020, and frankly, we're not doing that well with our targets, what could change? Our Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, at this point, with the UN General Assembly, has been talking about making September 2019 a defining year for the SDGs, a defining year to stop runaway climate change, and we're going to talk about climate tomorrow. A defining year to meet things like, can we eradicate poverty? Can we get to zero hunger, etc.? And if this is going to be a defining year, I feel like it requires defining moments. And for me, that means, how do we open up the kimono to those I call the unusual suspects? How do we bring in folks who aren't usually part of this conversation and say, look, we're all one human being. We're all a group of people that need to survive on this little blue dot. How do we ensure that we don't destroy it for our future generations? And so that's what this show is all about. It's a one-year experiment to really see if we can use the internet, we can use this digital world to bring in folks who usually are not part of the conversation and have their thinking, their thoughts, the world around. So without further ado, let me get to SDG 11, which is today's SDG. Again, sustainable cities and communities. The targets for SDG 11 are pretty interesting because, in essence, when you hear sustainable cities and communities, you think, okay, what exactly does that mean? And is that about the businesses, for example, that are in the cities and in the communities? Is it about the people? Who's it really about? And the short answer is it's about all of us. But specifically, we talk a lot about governments in SDG 11. So one target, for example, is how does the government develop adequate, safe, and affordable housing? By 2030, can every human being, and now this becomes a tall order, right, have adequate, safe, and affordable housing? So in my mind, that's a basic right. Why wouldn't, with the kind of monies that we as a planet have floating around here, why wouldn't every human being have adequate, safe, and affordable housing? But there's more. Basic services. Can we get away from slums and slum living? Affordable, accessible, and sustainable transportation. That's another piece of it. How do we create, a few days ago, when we were doing actually SDG 9, Industry, Innovation, Infrastructure, I talked a little bit about infrastructure being about what the governments can provide, because how do you innovate? How do you create? How do you build businesses, a life, without the appropriate infrastructure? So another piece of this is transportation. How do we have decent, accessible, affordable transportation for everyone so people can get from one place to another? We saw how the world changed with the advent of the motor car, right? In the 1900s, early 1900s, 1912, 1913, around that time. Cars went from a curiosity. Everybody had a horse-drawn carriage. These were called the horseless carriages, right? And everybody wondered, what would I need a motor car for? What would I need a horseless carriage for? And now it is the horse-drawn carriages that are a thing of the past. And the car, the, the motor vehicle has become the reason why we can work hours away from where we live. We can expect different foods and supplies and things like that to go across all kinds of travel, all kinds of roads. They can take trains and get to us. So having that affordable, accessible, and sustainable transport, imagine when it is participatory, when every human can participate. Because we still have plenty of communities, a lot of the world, I think, and I could be wrong, but I'm thinking most of the world probably does not have access to affordable, clean, accessible, shall we say safe transportation. Right? A lot of that may come from cities, and not all of the cities, some parts of the cities. Other cities deal with crime. So speaking of crime, how do we protect those that are vulnerable, particularly women, children, persons with disabilities? How do we protect them so they too can take transportations, can live safely, can have that adequate life that we are all hoping for? And then the other piece of this is how do we, speaking, I just said something about cities, right? So looking at urbanization, looking at cities, how do we build out our cities? I use the word participatory so that they are participatory. They're integrated services. They have sustainable human settlement planning, particularly as you're looking at a world where more and more humans are being born into it. We talked a few days ago about the future of food. And we'll talk a little bit more about the future of food with our guests later on as we talk about production and consumption. But when you're looking at the future of food, the future of life on this planet, how do we build sustainable human settlements? How do we plan that? This is all part of SDG 11. How do we protect and safeguard the world's cultural, natural heritage? We all have inherited a set of natural resources that is our planet, a set of cultural resources that are our ancestors. How do we protect that? When we first kicked off the show, we had the UNESCO, the United Nations, oh boy, UNESCO, what does it stand for? Well, it's something like cultural and education. I think it's educational, social, and cultural, something like that. But basically, it's the United Nations agency that deals with culture, that deals with cultural heritage, that deals with education, scientific exploration. And we had their ambassador for the free flow of knowledge with us that first day. And when you look at kind of what they do, they protect these. And it's interesting because SDG 11 is therefore kind of aligned to what they do. And we know that the United Nations is an organization of mandates. So their mandate will be integrated with SDG 11. So I hope that gives you enough of a background. I'm going to kick it over to you, my friend, Mayra, for the continuation of the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Radia. I think you gave us a great start with all this information you are giving us. And I was trying to write down all you said, but it's like this is too much. So I just wanna get this point. You were saying we heritage natural resources, and so far, just in Mexico City, we have really big issues with water, for example. So I can imagine, according to the UN, they say like by 2050, 6.5 billion of people is going to be urban. So I can imagine if we are already like 28 million of people here in Mexico City, and we are having like already problems with water. I can imagine when we are like 35 or 40 million living here in the same city, not just because of the water, because of the traffic, because of the cars, because of the food, because of the waste of food, because of the smog. I mean, we have like so many problems. And I think sometimes like the conversation, it goes straight to what should we do in the cities in order to give security, to give a clean streets, to give a hospitals, to give a shelter, and to give all these things. But we are like not looking at what can we do to develop villages, to develop towns, to develop small cities, to making these green cities. So instead of like trying to focus all the energy in big cities, that I know we have to work on that. I mean, governments have to work on that. But besides that, why don't we focus on small cities that they're starting to growing up, and why we don't give them security, schools, houses, hospitals, and everything there, and then we are not worried about like all these people is migrating to these big cities, because already Mexico City is a big mess. I like the city, I love the city, but honestly, like if I think in the next 20 years, I think I'm not gonna live here because of the traffic and because of the water. We are running out of everything. Just in front of here, of Casa Jammer, there's this huge mall, and it used to be a huge land. It was trees, and it was a just trees. That's it, green. And now it's a mall. We have like so many malls in Mexico City. It's like, why do we have to buy to build another mall? So we have already like 30 or 50 malls in Mexico City. So why do we have to buy that one? And why don't we don't make a park there? So there's like, I think so many things, but I think Radia, talking about the natural resources, Mexico City already has a lot of problems. But why do we focus on developing small cities into green and smart cities? So we don't have those problems then.
I think that's a really good question, Myra. And as you were talking, you just made such a great set of points. As somebody who lives in the city like when I look at New York City, it feels like it's already been stretched, thin. It's been stretched to its limits, right? If you look at New York City, even if you look at a small version of New York City, where we are here in Jersey City, New Jersey, which is about 5 minutes outside of New York City, for example, you're still looking at that kind of that cityscape, where you kind of just like you said, the natural resources are gone. There's overdevelopment in a lot of cities. There's kind of like that cityscape versus a landscape, if you will. And I think too much of it, to be honest, is the lack of one of the things I said, which is future settlement planning. They're not planning for human settlement so much as they're planning for financial longevity of the city. And too often it feels like there is a battle between safe homes, safe people, people who can flourish, and a city that is making money, and city officials that are going to be considered successful and well paid. And I think part of that is that when you're looking at creating the appropriate future settlements, you are also looking at a long-term gain versus a short-term, success, if you will. One of the things, if you remember, on when we first kicked off this, the ex-human at the United Nations General Assembly, when we were at the assembly for that get-together, the Kosovo ambassador, Ambassador Tuta, said to us, I had a conversation with her about the choices that Kosovo had to make for them as a country to come online at a time when we are online. In other words, for them to be fairly digitally inclusive, digital savvy, for a young country about 10 years old, a country that was devastated by war, and by every count would be considered successful if they're just able to get people shelter and food. And they went beyond that, and they have the most, they're among the top digitally savvy nations on the planet. They're among the top nations with engineering degrees and IT degrees. And why is that? Because they made a long-term choice to pick getting the internet over getting food and shelter. And one would say, well, wait a minute. What does that even mean? Does that mean people were going without food and shelter? But I think that balance although it may have initially cost, and maybe people were hungry and they may have needed to be. And yes, the good news is we don't know of people dying in without shelter or without food as a result of those choices. But we do know that those choices were a struggle because they could have focused 100% on food. They could have focused 100% on shelter, but they made room to focus on the future. And I think when you're looking at city planning, that is kind of the issue there. I think the city has to focus on planning what their future would look like, what the future of humans settling there would look like. I think that's really the biggest things. One of the things that you said about your city, Mexico City, feeling way overcrowded and you thinking, my goodness, I want to run out of this place, is very important to note. And I don't want us to forget that. And that is that once you start looking at what I said before about equal access, adequate, safe, affordable housing, basic services, upgrading those slums, affordable, accessible, and sustainable transportation. If everybody had that, to be honest, most of us, I don't think, would live in the city. I don't think everybody thrives in a city environment. I think that a lot of us live in the city because that's where the opportunity is. The opportunity is not in your village. The opportunity is not in your rural community. The opportunity is in the city. And I think a change like that creates what we need to undermine some of those statistics. I remember at the UN, one of the conversations, when I was on the inside, I call it, at the UN, one of the conversations that I used to have with some of the lawmakers and the regulatory folks, the folks that are looking into the future of humanity and saying, hey, like you said, there would be however many billion more people, however many million more people who are urbanized, who are in cities by whatever year, 2060, 2050, 2040. There's so many of those stats. And one of the things I said was, have we taken into account what Ex-Human does, which is looking at the context of technology? Have we looked at the fact that there's going to be a significant difference between driving yourself to work and being driven to work by an autonomous vehicle? Because ultimately, even my commute changes if I can wake up in the morning, get in the car, go to sleep, have the car take me to work, and then go to work and send the car off to park at home and come pick me up later. That changes everything. Ultimately, I may say, you know what, I hate living in the city. I'm gonna live 3 hours away because I'm okay with leaving at 6 a.m. in the morning. I'm okay with getting to work at 9 a.m. once I leave at 6 a.m. Versus now when I go, that commute is impossible. I can't deal with that. So I think that as you start to look at accessibility from that perspective, I think that makes a huge difference. And I think more and more we need to contextualize, because I actually don't think some of the things that we're looking at the UN and the expectations that we have for the future are going to stay the same as we start to look at the rise of the exponential human, the rise of the exponential machine. I think those are going to change the context. So I'll kick that back over to you, Mayra.
Thank you, my friend. Well, I now, well, we have our guest for SDG number 12. I'm going to introduce him just in a few seconds. I just want to keep a few things you said so he listens what we were talking about. Talking about sustainable cities and communities, Eduardo. So basically, I just want to end with this thought. We have to build smarter, right? I think if we want this world to work, we do have to build smart. We do have to have a second plan, not with huge cities, but small cities. And I think Labor is doing a great job doing supporting producers, artisans. So I think that's a really good way to keep people in their own places, in their towns, and to have also a economic development. So I think we have to we have to build smart, and we have to plan for the future. And it's not just about economy; it's about the food, it's about the cities, it's about a transportation. You were saying it's about education. So I think those are my final thoughts, and I don't know what you think.
I am with you. I completely agree. I actually believe exactly what you're saying and would love for us to bring in SDG 12 into this conversation. Now that our guest for the day has arrived, I'm very excited to have this conversation with him. I'm going to set the stage a little bit with SDG 12. SDG 12, I think, has a lovely connection with SDG 11, which is what we were talking about. So hopping from this discussion of sustainable cities and communities, as it says on my wall, to SDG 12, which brings in responsible consumption and production. What you need, at least partly what you need for sustainable cities and communities. Let me talk a little bit, though, about responsible consumption and production and what that means. We'll use that word sustainable again. Sustainable consumption and production is a big part of it. How do you do your consumption and your producing in a sustainable way? If you're looking at meats, if you're looking at vegetables, you're looking at the same land that we live on, that we farm on, and that we grow our cattle on. Just those three super basic elements are looking at a stress factor on Mother Earth, right? And as I said earlier in the show, we only have this little blue dot. It is all we know that can sustain human life. How do we take care of it while living on it and expecting it to take care of us by giving us shelter and food consistently? I mean, this is the normal cycle of humanity. And it's interesting, the other day when we were talking with Labor, and one of the things our guest said was that cyclical way in which the older, more indigenous creators, masters of their craft, were looking at the world, where nothing went to waste, where everything kind of went in a wonderful cycle. How do we think that way? How do we do efficient and sustainable management of natural resources? And here's one interesting target. How do we halve our food waste? How do we create environmentally sound chemical waste management? It is with that thinking that I'd like to kick this back over to you to introduce our guest, Mayra.
Thank you, Radia. Well, let me, guys, introduce you to this wonderful CEO and director of Another Point of View. And I really like to start, thank for everything. Thank you for being here, Eduardo. Thanks for being here, for having the time with us. And I want you to tell us, please, why your company name is Another Point of View.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Mayra, for inviting me. First of all, Another Point of View, born like a marketing agency, but only dedicated to the agricultural sector. It doesn't work with that sector, so we start to be disruptive. And why Another Point of View? Because we want to make the change. Not working much more the same way, like all the marketing agencies, and try to do something.
Okay.
First of all.
Okay, and I like to start with this conversation with Eduardo, because basically what he does is he shortens, in his words, he shortened the bridge between consumption in cities and agricultural producers, and he utilized intelligence, but in agrotech. Yes. So basically, you give information to the producers so they have better ways to think, to do their food, than to produce it.
Yes. Well, I am very agree with both of you when you speak about consumption and conscious, about how much it's okay for everyone. This is the first question I ask myself. How much is it good for everyone? Because when you get access to much more, you consider yourself like a person. You consider yourself like a high quality of life. Yeah, if that exists. But uh, the humans need to ask another time or one more time how much it's okay for everyone. And second, the way to short the bridge between growers and consumers is meeting each other. Yes, it's make a very good meeting of everyone. Yes, because the people on the cities, they don't know where provide their foods, and they don't pay the they don't pay enough
Fair wage.
for a fair wage for the food that are they consuming, because it represents where are where are they like growers, and what is the challenge of produce more and better. So what are our support of them? First, we start to make talks about conscience with the growers about how to sustainable could make the difference, and creating value not only because it's okay. More of that sustainable. It's about long to protect the business model to the long time. Yes, because if we continue producing in this way with fertilizers and chemical, ¿cómo se dice? Los que matan las plagas,
Pesticides.
pesticides, yes. If we continue in this way, we will transform the earth for a desert, a very long desert. No? And well, we start to talk about how the market pay a little bit more when the product is organic or has healthy values and benefits for the consumers. And the second part is trying to moving the growers to use bio packaging, and we are trying to use paper and less PET, or we're introducing paper clamshells with plastic, and well, try to reduce the trash. And the third is giving more information about technology. Yes, first it's with the drones, because the drones well help a lot of to searching information. The drones reduce the time they spend in the exploration. And finally, well, with social media and point of sales on internet, it reduces the bridge between the consumers and the growers. It's the way that we are working on that.
I really like it, Eduardo. Thank you very much, Radia. And I just love what Eduardo said about one thing. Consumption and production is not just about grow and eat food. It's also about sustainability in the land. As we were talking about sustainable cities, I think here in SDG number 12, we're talking about sustainable land, farms, long-term farms, not just like, because if we don't care about the land, we are not longer going to produce any food, right? So I do agree. I was watching I think at Netflix, and this guy, what basically he grows different kind of food, because that way it kind of gives the earth a second chance. But what I want to go to you, Radia, is with the last thing Eduardo said, that is about drones. And I think that's another way, and I think that goes exactly to the ex-human theory you have, because by using this info the drones are giving, can use this data so we can produce better food, right? So, Radia, I want to go.
First of all, I just love the business model. One of the questions I'd love for you to answer at some point, Luis, is how an organization that does marketing gets into the business with some of these kind of agri-food with and for them, because I actually think it's one of the issues that you find in business, where on the latest piece that I love that you guys cover is the element of supply and demand. A lot of us in business, and I mean a lot of us in business are obviously focused on supply and demand. It's how the organization, they have to worry about whether or not what they're growing is customer would be interested in consuming. The idea of healthy eating, the way we're all looking around and saying, whoa, I don't want to eat pesticides. I want something that is more organic, and my family, things that are good for my health, that'll help me will kill me, and I'm gonna get diseases. We are all looking towards that brighter future. We want to be able to work towards it. So I think what you have done took care. The first is I like the bridging the gap between the food producer and the consumer by creating connections, because that social media element, that connection, that seeing your grower, and in essence the grower seeing their consumer, create talking about creating a level of empathy, the master, what we would call in, and having that master creator teach the supposedly modern worker, and in so doing creating the kind of connection that builds empathy so that neither one of them looks at the other person as an other. I don't understand you, and you have done what this organization at least seeks to do, if I understand it correctly, is to kind of build that bridge, which I think is huge. And then going back to what you are saying, Mayra, is protecting the earth by doing sustainable practices like not with sustainably does not just produce organic food for us who don't want to eat food that is awful to our systems, but also it protects the earth. It makes it more sustainable, and it makes it easier for these farmers to create a sustainable business. I'm gonna stop there. I have a few other thoughts, but I'm gonna stop there, and I want to kick this back. How does a marketing organization, a marketing firm, get into the business of expanding so beyond marketing that you can create what feels like a cultural transformation?
Como una firma de marketing, o sea, desde another point of view, con estas prácticas de marketing que tienes, puedes impactar y cambiar la cultura del productor.
When we saw the three circles about how to create sustainable solutions, we saw that are separated in three parts. The first was social, and because we are human consumption and human growing or sustainability, and because the earth is ¿cómo se dice desperdiciar? If we waste the earth, we have nothing. And the third part was revenues. This is the hardest part, because revenues, like human beings, we are considered at the same level of even oxygen. So if we don't introduce a marketing and business model to this equation, maybe governments and growers and consumers, they don't really find fast the stimulation to do something different. And another part of the scene is the storytelling of those growers. And we talk about the better grow local, grow people worry about it to make a better life for the community. The people will start to paying a little bit more about their food, because they found a sense, and they found value. Yes, we are creating value and capture value for the growers. Tool to give them the inspiration, and even marketplace and supermarkets are the point of connection. Yes, finally we saw all the offer at the marketplace. So if more about the earth, we can connect with the people who provide us the foods.
I like that a lot. I want to summarize that a little bit today because we did 2 SDGs. But as we come to the, because I think it's really important as people start to look at what you're doing and how your impact, you're really bridging the gap between food producers and creating connections, helping markets, the way they make a living. By giving them a sustainable in pesticides, you're also teaching them healthy organic value interested in. And you're saying to them, this is what your customers want. And connect with them on social media and you'll see how they react to that. You're also giving them, which I really like, that information on technology, using drones, for example, to give them time back. So that's a huge value. You're reducing the time data through these drones, which is, of course, huge. And then, of course, now using social media to, if we wrap both of these up, and we're looking at what we just did with SDG 12 as an example, and how that had adequate, safe, and affordable. We're looking at basic services, and we're looking at upgraded slums, etc. A very big part of it being able to have access to the right food. As we're looking at the future of food, having sustainable practices so that our lands can actually be able to feed us. We don't even know the answer to the question, can handle to that. And as people look at the future, and we look at the future of all our practices, we know things have to change. And what you're doing on the SDG 12 side is super interesting, and I appreciate telling us about your organization. I also think it's really interesting that as a marketing organization, So Mayra, I'm going to make this my closing statement because we are way past time now. And in essence, I was very excited to have the conversation. Of course, we'll drive all this into SDG climate action. So again, thank you, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow.
Thank you, Radia. I don't know if Eduardo, you have a final statement to make.
No. Thank you for the invite. And the final 3 points of more. First, it's in the world we are trying to introduce to the vertical, and this could represent a very good source of the food. And we are transforming the way that we are built, our earth. We are trying to learn about how to produce or xeroponic, different kinds of second, the drones and robots almost make more efficient and more precise. Yes, the growers, and we should search. We should know how the world to produce better. And third, commercialization. Yes, commercial, because we have in pages to explain and connect all the people and reduce the change value and reduce the los intermediarios, los ¿cómo se dice? Los halves, los intermediaries. And internet is a very good tool to help to feed more people. Well, this is my final report.
Thank you, Eduardo. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Mike. So in order to get sustainable, we do have to make long-term relationships with natural resources. As Radia was saying, we don't know if we are going to be if we're going to have plenty of water in the next few years, maybe earth or maybe the land is going to resist all these growers. So let's build for the future. We'll see you tomorrow. We talk about SDG number 13, that is climate action. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Another Point of View. You can find also Social Jammers. and don't forget to use the hashtag BNBX. So that's all for today, my friends, and we see you tomorrow. Thank you, Eduardo, again. Thank you, Radia.